both, and good morning, Adam, and thank you for your presentation. And as always, I think you focus us on what we should be doing and what the issues are, and what's important as we come to preparing our report. And I suppose I just hope that the committee in its meetings over a year have helped to create awareness, but more than that, to actually give autistic people a chance to to air their concerns and the barriers in society that they face. I, for myself, have learned so much in the past year, and I have to thank all the people who presented at the committee for that. I think you're right in saying we need a legislation because it's wrong that when a government, a general election is called and a government changes, that everything has to start from scratch again. So, I think the committee has worked really well, cross-party support, and I'm hoping that whatever has been achieved, if it's not down in legislation, that it will be followed up by the next government, and I certainly would give a commitment from my party, if that was the case, that we would do that. One thing you said there about the autism innovation strategy that Minister Rabbit is working on, and you say it has faced significant opposition from government departments in the past, so maybe you'd expand on that and what we're talking about there, because that would be concerning. But I'm just wondering if it's similar to something that would come across in the Disability Committee, where a lot of departments, when you engage with them on what they do around disability, they kind of say, oh, well, there's one department that deals with disability, and they just don't seem to understand that everybody has a responsibility, and so be it with autism as well. I suppose, the lack of regulation of psychology, and then, the ABA as well. There was a good discussion, but I felt it was informative at the Disability Matters Committee, but I still feel until the autistic community support this type of therapy, or it supports autistic people, and is properly regulated, it does not have a place in society. But just if you just want to expand on that as well.
Deputy, in terms of the opposition, I'm not necessarily speaking specifically to the Autism Innovation Strategy, but it's more any effort that has really been implemented over the last decade to try and get an autism strategy in place. I think we've been lucky to get the Autism Innovation Strategy because we've had a significant commitment and push from the Minister of the Day to get that. But if you look back over the last number of years, I think first of all had a bill from the Labour Party in, I think, 2012. That was the first autism bill. This was followed by Senator Riley's bill in the last Shannon. This was followed by a motion from Sinn Féin, which passed unanimously in the Dáil, calling for an autism empowerment strategy. We've seen further efforts by the Rural Independent Group and by the Labour Party. So every time this has come to the floor of a House of the Oireachtas, it's had cross-party support. There hasn't been a single politician against it. And yet every time it actually comes to, well, how do we turn that political will into reality, it simply doesn't take place. Now, I think that that's concerning, because I think if there's a political consensus on something based on the needs of the autism community, it should happen. I mean, if we want to understand the rationale for some of the opposition, I would probably look to two pieces. I think there can be a reluctance to take a disability-specific approach. But I think we need to be very clear. We have a Disability Act. We have a National Disability Inclusion Strategy. But in lots of areas of public policy, we have broader strategies, and then we recognise the need to put specific lenses on issues. We have Sláinte Care, but there's still a national cancer strategy. We have an anti-racism strategy, but there's still specific strategies focusing on the traveller and Roma community. So sometimes there's a need to put a specific lens, even perhaps for a period of time, on a particular cohort of people. And I think the data that comes from the autism community, the fact that we're now looking at a community of people that, if we were having this discussion even last year, we would have been talking about 1.55%. We're now talking about 3.38% of people based on Department of Education data. There has been a significant shift in demographics. There's been a massive range of issues arising as a result of that. And quite simply, if the existing apparatus was working, we wouldn't be asking for a specific strategy. We're asking for it because it clearly hasn't delivered for the scale of the challenges the community is facing. And I think kind of closely linked to that, I think there has been perhaps over the years when we look at issues, for example, such as the reform of the Epson Act, it's really positive now to see that review take place and to progress. But in the past, there's been a sense of, well, we don't need to implement that legislation because, we're doing it anyway. But I think we know in reality, as long as we take a model that's grace and favour, people are left behind. And very often it's those who face the greatest barriers. I think too much of the supports for autistic people in Ireland are based on this charity model instead of recognising that autistic people are rights holders. And they would probably be, I think, the two areas that we would see the most significant causes of opposition, and that's why we think legislation is important. I think in terms of behaviour-based approaches, you know, it is very, very clear that it is the overwhelming view of autistic adults who have experienced ABA that this can be an extremely traumatizing experience. I think there's also a recognition that the actual evidence base for ABA for many autistic people is extraordinarily questionable, no matter what perspective you come from. But what I would say is, you know, when we talk about the ABA industry, it is an incredibly well-funded industry. So it's not surprising that as evidence moves on, as the wishes of the community moves on, that there will be significant pushback. But what I would describe that to date would be pushback. I wouldn't see it as particularly constructive. And even I think when you look at, for example, the International ABA Congress, which was held here last year, when they have on their agenda basically a session which is about how to answer your critics, that shows to me that we're really not talking about anything substantive, and I think there is still a very paternalistic view within that sector that I think is problematic. What this fundamentally comes back to is, why do we have therapies? Why is there interventions for autism? The only sorts of supports we should be looking at for autistic people are ones that support an autistic person to be their best selves in the community. Yes, to gain an understanding into how other people think, but then to have the autonomy to make their own decisions and to be fully involved in the community. I think what's very worrying is that within our education health system, we still see overwhelmingly behaviour-based approaches. The recent autism best practice guidelines from the Department of Education, while there's much good in those guidelines, we would have raised significant concerns prior to their publication that there's a whole pillar in them that are based around behaviour-based approaches. And I'm not sure that part of the reason for that isn't that there is a tendency to want to give people who perhaps don't understand autism as well what they want, which is, I can see behaviour and I want to address it, as opposed to actually trying to give people who are working in our health and education system a human rights compliant understanding of what autism is.